You might have seen videos like this before, where people will say, these are the best exercises to grow your shoulders. And then they proceed to show you these very odd exercises, which are sometimes very, very complicated. And if you've ever fallen for any of these videos, you might have noticed that no matter how many of these seemingly magic exercises you add to your program, it doesn't really seem to have any noticeable effect on your results. And that is because there simply are no magic exercises. There are no exercises that are alone just going to blow up your physique or a particular body part when you start doing them. There are effective exercises and there are less effective exercises. And today we are going to go through a couple of criteria that you can use to determine if an exercise is effective or not. So you then can know how to determine the best exercises for your program based on the equipment that you have available. The goal of exercise is to deeply enroll the strength of the target muscle groups within a minimum time to stimulate strength and size increases with minimal risk of injury while doing it. This is the basis for these criteria that I'm now going to talk about, and this is why it's so important for you to know these. But also, a very important piece of context for you guys to understand is that even if the exercises that you pick do fulfill all of these criteria, if you perform them with bad form and not very intensely, it is still not going to be very effective, and you're still probably going to end up injuring yourself eventually. And so after you have picked all of the exercises for your program based on these criteria that I'm going to talk about, at the end of the day, when it comes to actually stimulating your muscles to grow, you have to perform the exercises with a high degree of intensity, and you have to perform the exercises with good form if you want to do so as efficiently as possible and with minimal risk of injuring yourself. Criteria number 1. Exercise should track muscle and joint function. We want the exercise to be designed based on the joint movements produced by the target muscle groups. So for example, an exercise that does that would be something as simple as a leg extension. You are targeting your quadriceps. What is one of the functions of the quadriceps? It is to extend the knee. What are you doing when you're doing a leg extension? You are loading the function of knee extension. Another example would be something like a biceps curl. When you're doing a biceps curl, you're loading your biceps, obviously, and your biceps perform elbow flexion. You are loading the function of elbow flexion when you're doing a bicep curl, and so that exercise also tracks muscle and joint function. We want to avoid exercises that resemble or are meant to mimic exercises from, for example, sports and everyday living, because these exercises a lot of the time do not track muscle and joint function and also do not fulfill many of these other criteria that I'm going to mention. Criteria number 2. Avoid excessive levels of force. When your tissues get exposed to more force than they can handle is when injury happens. Some common reasons for excessive force in exercise is, for example, acceleration. Like you see some people, they're just swinging the weight when they're doing exercises in the gym. Another reason is applying force rapidly instead of gradually. Like you see some people in the gym, they're doing an exercise, and when they start doing the exercise and their arms or their legs or whatever body part they're training is completely relaxed, instead of starting to apply the force gradually until the weight just barely starts to move like you want to do, they start pushing as hard as they possibly can at the very start of the exercise. This creates a lot of force. Another reason for excessive force during exercise is when a muscle or a muscle group spasms. This can happen if the exercise doesn't evenly load the lumbar or the cervical spine. Another thing related to this criteria is that if an exercise cannot be performed without rapid movements and acceleration, it is not a good exercise and you should not be doing it. An example of an exercise like this would be something like a snatch or a clean and jerk. These are poor exercises for a variety of reasons, but these exercises cannot be performed without momentum and rapid acceleration, which makes them unnecessarily dangerous. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, please don't forget to leave a like on this video. It really supports the channel more than you believe, and I highly appreciate it. Criteria number 3. 3. Minimize instability. We want to minimize the need to stabilize our body when we're doing an exercise, so we can focus as much of our effort as possible on deeply fatiguing the target muscle groups. And a part of this is to choose exercises that we can do bilaterally and symmetrically whenever practical. This criteria is also one of the reasons why a well-designed machine is usually the best option if we have access to one, and why we also preferably want to perform exercises seated rather than standing whenever practical. Criteria number 4. Minimize overall volume. We want to include enough exercises in our program so that we are able to effectively work all of the major muscle groups in the entire body, but we want to do that with as few exercises as we can. Therefore, we want to pick exercises that are complementary to each other so that each exercise addresses muscle groups that the other ones does not. We do not want to do more exercise than necessary, because beyond some point, more exercise for a particular muscle group does not add any additional benefit in strength and size increases. But what it does add is additional stress that your body has to allocate its limited resources towards recovering from. Criteria number 5. Consistency. We do not want to be unnecessarily varying the exercises that we do in our program and be adding a bunch of different set extension and set modification techniques. Contrary to popular belief, doing an exercise for some period of time is not going to make you stop responding to it. You don't just stop adapting to a specific exercise. I go way more in depth about this on my video about why muscle confusion is a myth, and if you want to find out why this is a myth, you can watch that video right here after you finish watching this one. And I will also put a link in the description to that video. Criteria number 6. Provide continuous and balanced resistance. We want the exercise to provide continuous and balanced resistance for the target muscle group, and not do something like a burpee, for example, where we are transitioning between a squat or a jump and then a push-up, and you're not continuously loading any particular muscle group. We also want the resistance curve of the exercise to match the resistance curve of the muscle group that we are trying to train as closely as possible. For example, on most compound pushing movements, we want the resistance curve to increase towards the end of the range of motion, because we get stronger towards the end of the range of motion in those exercises. And on most isolation exercises, or simple exercises as they are called, like tricep extension, biceps curls, leg extension, we want the resistance to be the highest in the middle of the range of motion, and we want it to drop off towards the beginning and the end of the range of motion, because that's where our muscles are the weakest in those types of exercises. And if you have a question about what would be the ideal resistance curve for a particular exercise, feel free to ask me down in the comments. And like I also said, we want the resistance to be continuous. We don't want to give our muscles any breaks during the exercise. Like you see, for example, people do squats and they just stand up in the middle of the squat, they fully lock out their legs. Your muscles are not meaningfully loaded in that position, and you are basically giving them a break. And so a rule that I've talked about in another video is that if there is a part of the range of motion of an exercise where your muscles are not meaningfully loaded, just simply avoid that range of motion, or that part of the range of motion, because it's not doing you any good. Before I end the video though, I just want to note that even if you like an exercise, these criteria should always come first. Exercise safety and exercise efficacy should always come first when you're choosing your exercises for your program. But anyways guys, that was all for this video. I really hope you liked it. If you feel like you learned at least something useful from this video, then please don't forget to leave a like and press that subscribe and ring that notification bell so you can be notified the next time I upload useful content like this. But with that being said, I'll see you boys in the next video next time.